Mike Vigil, thank you very much for joining us on the State Secrets podcast. It's great to see you again. It's been a little while since
It
we've
has
talked.
been. It's always my pleasure, Brad.
I tell you, it seems like the last time we were talking with you, the world was complicated, moving quickly, and that only seems to have gotten worse. The pace of threats, broadly speaking, hasn't slowed down. Last time we talked with you, it was all about China, US fentanyl connection. That's still very much in the news every day, it seems almost. But what I want to talk to you with you today relates to an event from last Thursday in which Ismael Zambada, the co-founder, uh, I'm going to let you tell our audience who this person is and his significance. He was arrested in Texas along with the son of El Chapo. It was a very interesting operation in which the two were on an airplane. Zambada did not think he was going to the United States. Obviously, he was lured there by one of El Chapo's sons. Can you walk us through your take of kind of what happened and your initial reaction when we all woke up on Friday morning and saw these headlines?
Great question. Let me first, talk about who Mayo Zambada is. Mayo Zambada is Ismael Zambada Garcia. And you're right, Brad. He is a co-founder of the Sinaloa Cartel. In 1989, Mexico captured Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the godfather of drug trafficking at that time in Mexico. He was the leader of the Guadalajara cartel. He was captured in Guadalajara. And at that time, the Guadalajara cartel fragmented and it broke up into three components: the Tijuana cartel under the Arellano Felix brothers, the Juarez cartel under the Lord of the Skies, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, and then you had the Sinaloa cartel under Chapo Guzman, Hector Güero Palma Salazar, Juan Esparragosa Moreno, aka El Azul, and then Mayo Zambada. There was some conflict there, especially between the Tijuana cartel and the Sinaloa cartel, but the ones that really went out were Sinaloa. Mayo Zambada started his life as a fisherman, and actually he came from tremendous poverty. He was born in El Alamo, which is a little town in the municipality of Culiacan. And it's kind of amazing because this is a fact that not too many people know, is that most of the significant cartel leaders in Mexico come from the state of Sinaloa. So Mayo Zambada, he started to engage in drug trafficking. Obviously, like most drug traffickers, they start small, and then he grew and grew, and then took over the Sinaloa cartel in essence with the 1993 capture of Joaquin Guzman Loera in Guatemala, which was the first time.
So, if we fast forward to today, there's been a lot of developments, in particular with the Sinaloa cartel. Can you talk us through maybe a lot of people are asking why now? Why did the U.S. take this step now? What was important about the timing? What do you know about sort of the timing and some of the backstory that might have made the United States and the Justice Department say, okay, we're going to do this now?
Well, a lot of times it's opportunity, Brad. And I think that they saw an opportunity, especially with the extradition of Ovidio Guzman last year in 2023. So this has been in the planning for many months. And the agencies had access, obviously, to Ovidio, and they tried to work with them to cut a deal, and they allowed him to communicate with his brother, Joaquin Guzman Lopez. And there was communication where he was going to turn himself in and get some benefit, because he didn't have to be captured. So then all of a sudden, Mayo Zambada comes into the picture, and there's an opportunity to bring him to the United States. Mayo Zambada in 2020, I reported that he was very ill. He was very ill, and I think he's 76 years old. And there was a lure in terms of bringing him to the United States. He took it, under the pretense that Joaquin Guzman Lopez told him that they were going to look at ranches, they were going to look at potential airstrips and what have you. There was an aircraft that left Hermosillo on Thursday, only with the pilot on board. It left there, and then all of a sudden it turned off its transponder, landed someplace, obviously in a clandestine airstrip, which was then, the plane was then boarded by Guzman Lopez and then Mayo Zambada. And then from there, they went to Santa Teresa, New Mexico, not El Paso. I know that the Attorney General of the United States said it was El Paso. El Paso is very close, but Santa Teresa is a very small little town, population about 6,000. It's got a really tiny airport, and that's where authorities were waiting for the plane to land, and they took both individuals into custody.
What type of deal do you think uh, that Lopez made, and what was his thinking on? I'm trying to understand, I guess, the bigger picture here, and obviously we may not know all the details. What are What are your thoughts about that? And then how might that inform what we should expect to see in the next coming weeks and months in the wake of this? That's obviously going to throw some chaos and uncertainty into the leadership of the cartels.
Well, Lopez, Guzman Lopez obviously got a deal where if he turned himself in, he would get consideration, and then possibly also consideration for his brother Ovidio. But the big prize of all was bringing Mayo Zambada, and I don't think anybody was certain that he was going to board that plane because Mayo Zambada is probably one of the most intelligent and more astute of all the capos in the drug world in Mexico. But I think what happened is that he's so old and ill that I think that his suspicions were allayed by the fact that he was just very very sick, and he gets on the plane. Normally he would have never done that, and there's also conflict between the Chapitos and the rest of the Sinaloa cartel, especially in the state of Sonora. But apparently he trusted Guzman Lopez, because most of the conflict that he has right now are with two of his half brothers, Ivan Archibaldo, which is the leader of the so called component of the Sinaloa cartel called Los Chapitos. And then second in command is Jesus Alfredo. And then third in command was Ovidio. And then also Joaquin Guzman Lopez was probably the fourth one. They say that he was a top leader within the Sinaloa cartel. That's not the case. He was a member of the Sinaloa cartel, but not a top leader. Mayo Zambada, has headed that organization for many years. And let me say something, Brad, that he took this cartel from only dealing marijuana, cocaine, and heroin to now dealing synthetic drugs. They focused on methamphetamine and then also fentanyl. Why? Because they're very easy to make. They're trying to move away from plant based drugs like marijuana and heroin because, if they're fumigated or destroyed, they have to wait till the next cultivation cycle. They don't have to do that with synthetic drugs, and they get most of their precursor chemicals from China. They move it into the Pacific seaports of Lázaro Cárdenas in the state of Michoacán, and then also Manzanillo in the state of Colima. Very easy to get those chemicals in. And a lot of people call these super labs, Brad. And that's not the case. They're a metal tub. A metal tub. They mix the precursor chemicals with a shovel or a stick, and that's it. Uh, the the Sinaloa Cartel has also grown exponentially under the leadership of Mayo Zambada. They have now penetrated the avocado industry, which is a $3.5 billion industry. Lemon and lime, which also is a multi-billion dollar industry. The theft of lumber, the theft of petroleum, and then also the fishing industry. But they are also making billions of dollars in terms of, the migrants that come through Mexico. And the Sinaloa Cartel right now operates in 6 of the 7 continents around the world. They don't operate in Antarctica because nobody lives there, and the penguins don't have any money to buy drugs.
So, we have talked with you a lot about the issue of fentanyl and synthetic narcotics. And I want to jump back to a point you made. Most people, I don't believe, still today realize just how easy, as you were pointing out, that these things are to make. It's proven to be very difficult for the United States to come up with so far an effective strategy at keeping those precursor chemicals and the supplies out of the supply chain. So I want to talk with you about that. Fentanyl has now become a national topic. It's part of our presidential debate. It's part of, it's in the news much more frequently. The stories are tragic at how this chemical is destroying lives. How do you think the arrest in this operation and the ensuing sort of uncertainty in the cartel leadership may impact it? But more importantly, can you catch us up on what's happened respectively with the United States and their efforts to influence China, where a lot of these precursor chemicals come from? And then how do you see, going forward, whether it's a Trump administration or a Harris administration, how do you see the situation that we'll be facing one of those two presidents as we start off, early next year?
Well, China basically cooperates based on the relationship that it has at the moment with the United States. On May 1st of 2019, they outlawed all fentanyl and its analogs in terms of trying to control it. And but it really didn't work because there's tens of thousands of chemical companies and pharmaceutical companies that operate in China, and they just don't have the regulatory laws that would permit them to have an impact, nor do they have sufficient inspectors to go to these companies and make sure that they're not diverting these chemicals or the actual fentanyl itself. But now the flow has started again in terms of the precursor chemicals from China into Mexico. And the cartels, have, tremendous access to tons of these things. And it's shipped from China aboard containerized cargo ships. But let's say that China tomorrow was able to shut down the movement of precursor chemicals into Mexico, then the one that would pick up that slack would be India. And India is already sending some of those chemicals into Mexico, and there's really little control over those substances in that country. So it's very easy for them to get those precursor chemicals. And I think this is going to be a big issue for whoever wants the presidency, because the flow of fentanyl continues to come across, and the epicenter for that is San Diego, California. That is the epicenter for the entry of fentanyl into the United States. It doesn't have the bulk of cocaine and other drugs, and very easy to smuggle in. But the thing is also is that along the border, they're starting to put technology like X-ray machines, because in the past, Brad, they were only able to search about 17% of passenger, or I mean, cargo trucks, and 3% of passenger vehicles. When they complete all of this technology insertion into the land ports of entry, then they're going to be able to, search about 75% of the cargo trucks, and then probably about 20% of passenger vehicles. But make no mistake about it, 80% of the fentanyl coming into the United States comes in through the land ports of entry. There's politicians that say that it's, undocumented migrants. That's not the case. The people that drive those chemicals from Mexico, or the fentanyl, are U.S. citizens. The ones that distribute it here in the United States are U.S. citizens. And it's not even logical to say, okay, well, we captured a non-documented migrant with a backpack of fentanyl. A backpack or 10 backpacks or 100 backpacks is not going to satisfy the U.S. Consumer demand that we have here in the United States. We here need to do a better job in terms of reducing the demand. I've always been an advocate of, putting or creating curriculum at all levels of, elementary, junior high, high school, to educate our kids, because in the past they would get a healthcare professional or a police officer that will go to the schools and say, don't use drugs, stay away from drugs. That's not going to cut it. You have to have it, within the curriculum. And then we need to do a better job in terms of treatment, because our treatment facilities, as you well know, they detoxify the users, but then they release them. There's no follow up, and they go back to the same neighborhoods and back to the same people that got them addicted in the first place. And then within 2 weeks, they're addicted again. So there's many things that we can do. Also, we need to do a better job in terms of trying to work with Mexico. There's been issues there, and the relationships are pretty broken. So I think that if whoever wins the presidency needs to really sit down with Claudia Sheinbaum, who's going to be the next president of Mexico, and try to develop a viable and comprehensive counter drug strategy, because a lot of times here in the United States we're reactive rather than proactive. We can no longer do that. And the drug traffickers, change their routes on a dime. They spin on a dime, and they develop strategies. And then, here we have the United States trying to play catch up ball, and a reactive stance is not going to take you very far.
That that's a really interesting point. It's one that we're paying a lot more attention to at the Cipher Brief. I was reading earlier today that a congressional committee, a bipartisan congressional committee, reviewed the latest national defense strategy and said that it's woefully inadequate. The United States is not ready to fight a major war. Yet at the time right now, we are at a higher risk of having to face a major war than we have been perhaps since World War II, was the gist of this report. And it really kind of speaks to what you're talking about now. A lot of folks, are doing more to say that the United States can no longer afford to be reactive, whether it's, facing the growing sort of collection of anti-Western nations like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and that growing alliance and the threats that they're presenting, whether it's, continued pressure on supply chains and the technology race with China, or space, or, you name it. What I am worried about is that Americans still don't really have a sense of the domestic threats that are facing our country from the outside. And this is one of the best examples, I think, that, we're talking about right now. You mentioned education at school. and I'm 100% for that. I think that we're overdue on cyber, on media training and awareness, teaching kids how to think about these things. I mean, I I'm I'm fearful of the young kids now that might not really understand the dangers of fentanyl and how quickly that can destroy a life. What role do you think that the government, the authorities, the agencies should be playing in 2024 to help educate people? Because if you go back decades, when you started your career in government, it really was a different time in terms of how fast the threats were propagating and how pervasive the threats were in the United States. It's a different world in 2024, and my sense is that Americans still have no concept about how scary it is, how real these threats are. What should the government, what should the private sector be doing? Uh, and I'll give you a hint about what I'm thinking with this. We've seen some instances related to the Ukraine war where the U.S. government quickly declassified information, and it had a dramatic effect. Do you think something like that might be useful in terms of helping to combat the drug trade, just understanding this threat a little bit more?
Well, you make a very good point, Brad, and I think that we need to do a better job in terms of public awareness. If you look at the news channels today, it's all about politics, 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 politics. And that's the only thing that people hear. I think that we need to do a better job in terms of educating the public because they really don't have an understanding of how dangerous illegal drugs are, especially fentanyl. Once in a while, you'll see a politician come to, for example, New Mexico, and they'll talk to a small crowd about the problem, but offer no solutions. And that's maybe once a year, but we need to educate the public, the parents, the schools. Everybody has to play a role in this. And without this public awareness, there's people that are not aware of the horrible danger that people face. For example, the cartels now are mixing fentanyl, which is 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine, and 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be fatal to a normal human being. 2 milligrams is the equivalent of a few grains of salt. So the cartels now are mixing fentanyl with methamphetamine, with heroin, even with marijuana and cocaine, so that the users are not even aware that they're using fentanyl. The last 3 years, we've lost over 110,000 people to drug overdoses, and about 70,000 of those were due to fentanyl. So we need to educate them. We need to do harm reduction in terms of naloxone that reverses opioid overdoses, and then also test strips, wide distribution of test strips, so that drug users can test their drug of choice and determine whether it's contaminated with fentanyl. There's a lot of things that we can do, but we really need to take an aggressive posture if we're really going to put a dent into this.
Mike, what as we kind of wrap up here, what are you going to be looking for in the coming weeks and months ahead related to, the change here that we've seen in the cartel operations, the uncertainty related to our presidential election, relations with Mexico? There's a lot of big themes kind of swirling around here that really could potentially mean we'd see some significant changes. What are you going to be looking for that tells you things might be changing, maybe from the status quo that we've had the last few years?
Well, the thing is that the capture of Mayo Zambada and then Joaquin Guzman Lopez is not going to put a dent in the Sinaloa Cartel. The Sinaloa Cartel has a very solid infrastructure. As I stated, they operate in 6 of the 7 continents around the world. And in order to really damage it, you're going to have to basically destroy the entire infrastructure. Taking out a leader usually leads to a fragmentation of a cartel, and then you have internal conflict, people fighting for control of that organization. I don't know if that's going to happen with the Sinaloa Cartel. I think that they have a very strong bench in terms of leaders that can step in and take control. For example, Chapo's brother, Aureliano Guzman Loera, and then maybe Ivan Archibaldo, the son of Chapo Guzman. And I'm sure that they know that if they do engage in internal turmoil, the only ones that would benefit would be the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Now, the U.S. in the past couple of years have focused strictly on the Sinaloa Cartel. Why? Because they manufacture most of the fentanyl. But you also have other cartels like the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, that is the second most powerful cartel in Mexico, that also manufactures fentanyl. You have the Nueva Familia Michoacana that also manufactures fentanyl. It's that multicolored fentanyl that looks like Skittles. So the DEA and all the other agencies are going to have to work together seamlessly, and I repeat, seamlessly, to basically attack all of those cartels, and then maybe others that are at the mid level, because if you ignore them, then they're going to become ultra powerful. One of the big factors that we have had in Mexico is President Lopez Obrador's policy of abrazos y no balazos, hugs and not gunshots. And that's, he took the policy of not confronting the cartels per se, thinking that they would minimize violence. And his sexenio, or his 6-year term, will be the bloodiest that has existed in Mexico. More killings than any other during any other administration. But hopefully, Claudia Sheinbaum will change that. But that remains to be seen, because she's already made comments that she is going to follow the same strategy as Lopez Obrador. And if that's the case, the only ones that are going to win are the cartels, because that's going to translate into more drugs coming into the United States, and then also more violence in Mexico. So, also, what I would recommend too, whoever comes in, if it's Kamala Harris, that they sit down with Claudia Sheinbaum and develop a comprehensive strategy in order to attack these cartels, and maybe even get other countries to work together, because we're talking about transnational organized crime, and these organizations operate in many countries. And if we have ample sharing of information, we can put it all together and hopefully get indictments here in the United States and bring them to justice here, because a lot of countries in Latin America don't have adequate judicial systems to deal with this problem.
I think uh, I think Mike, you just laid out a very hopeful strategy that I hope that our government folks are listening. I think working seamlessly seems to be no matter what threat it is in the national security space, just the absolute requirement today. Because as we've seen so many times, not one country, even the United States, can really do it alone anymore. So I think those are excellent words, and I hope a lot of people listening are paying attention. Mike, I know you're very busy. You travel all over the place. You're one of the busiest Cipher Brief experts I think that we have. I really appreciate you taking the time just to kind of walk us through some of the more important components, and it's been great catching up with you. We have to not make it so long next time.
It's always my pleasure, and I've always admired the Cipher Brief. You do an exceptional job in terms of informing the public corporations, and everybody that really needs to know about threats to the United States, not only drug threats but terrorism and other things. So I congratulate you and Suzanne for that.
Well, thanks. We look forward to keeping in touch and talking with you again soon.
Thank you.